I walked into the Riverside Country Club wearing my best blazer, the one I'd bought for investor meetings that never seemed to go anywhere. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and I could smell the expensive cologne and perfume mixing with the scent of prime rib from the dining room. Dad's 60th birthday party was already in full swing, and I was fashionably late as usual, having spent the afternoon putting final touches on a pitch deck that felt like my last shot at making something of myself. The valet had looked at my beat-up Honda Civic like it was contaminated when I pulled up next to a row of BMWs and Mercedes. I'd almost turned around then, but I'd promised Mom I'd be here, and despite everything, I still believed family obligations mattered. That belief was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The main dining room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Dad stood near the bar, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my rent. He was holding court with his business associates from Martinez Construction, gesturing with a whiskey glass while telling some story that had everyone chuckling. Mom moved through the crowd like a professional hostess, her emerald dress catching the light as she directed catering staff and air-kissed relatives I barely recognized. I spotted Jessica immediately. She was impossible to miss, really. My younger sister commanded attention without trying, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders as she laughed with a group of Dad's clients. She wore a stunning red dress that hugged her curves perfectly, and I could see why she'd become the face of Martinez Construction's marketing department. Everyone loved Jessica. She had inherited Dad's charisma and Mom's grace, plus she'd chosen the path they'd always wanted for both of us, joining the family business straight out of college instead of chasing dreams that seemed to get smaller every year. I made my way through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries with aunts and uncles who asked the same questions they always asked. How's the business going? When are you going to settle down? Why don't you just come work for your father? Their concern felt genuine enough, but underneath it was that familiar undertone of pity mixed with disappointment. Alex, the Martinez child who could have had everything handed to them but chose to struggle instead. When I finally reached Dad, he was deep in conversation with his longtime business partner, Uncle Carlos. They were discussing some new development project on the east side of town, their voices animated with the kind of passion Dad had never shown when I talked about sustainable packaging solutions or the environmental impact of construction waste. I waited for a natural pause in their conversation, the way Mom had taught me when I was little. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, extending my hand with a smile that felt more genuine than I'd expected. Despite everything, I loved the old man. He'd worked his way up from nothing, built an empire with his bare hands, and provided a life for us that his own parents could never have imagined. Dad looked at me for a moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that I'd actually shown up. Or perhaps disappointment that I wasn't wearing a tie. "Alex, you made it," he said, pulling me into a brief hug that smelled like aftershave and success. "I wasn't sure you would." The comment stung more than it should have. I'd missed exactly one family gathering in the past 2 years, and that was because I'd been in the emergency room with food poisoning. But I pushed down the defensive response that wanted to bubble up and instead focused on the moment. "Wouldn't miss it, Dad. This is a big milestone." Uncle Carlos clapped me on the shoulder. "How's that business of yours going, Mijo? Still trying to save the world with cardboard boxes?" He chuckled and Dad joined in. They weren't being malicious exactly, but their amusement at my work felt like a small knife twist. 3 years of 18-hour days, maxed-out credit cards, and sleepless nights reduced to a joke about cardboard boxes. "Actually, things are looking up," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "We're in talks with some major investors, and there's been interest from some big companies looking to reduce their environmental footprint." I didn't mention that those talks had been going on for months with no concrete results, or that my bank account was currently sitting at $347. Dad nodded politely, but I could see his attention was already drifting back to Uncle Carlos and their development plans. "That's good to hear, Mijo. Hey Carlos, tell Alex about the new shopping center project. Maybe there's something there for sustainable packaging, right?" He laughed again, and Uncle Carlos launched into a description of retail spaces and anchor tenants, while I stood there feeling increasingly invisible. That's when Jessica appeared, seeming to glide across the room with a glass of champagne in her hand. "Alex, I'm so glad you came." She hugged me tight, and for a moment I felt the warmth of genuine sibling affection. Jessica and I had been close as kids, before life and choices created the distance between us. "You look good, that blazer is sharp." "Thanks, Jess. You look incredible as always." And she did. Jessica had always been the beautiful one, the one who turned heads when she walked into a room. But more than that, she had the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. She belonged here in a way I never had. "Come on, I want you to meet someone," she said, linking her arm through mine. She led me away from Dad and Uncle Carlos, who barely seemed to notice our departure, toward a group of younger people near the windows overlooking the golf course. "Everyone, this is my brother Alex, the entrepreneur I was telling you about." The group welcomed me politely enough, but I could tell immediately that I was the outsider. They were Jessica's crowd, people from her MBA program and colleagues from the construction company. They spoke the same language of profit margins and market expansion, wore the same expensive watches, and shared the same assumptions about success and failure. When they asked about my business, I could see the polite disinterest in their eyes as I explained sustainable packaging solutions and environmental responsibility. One of them, a guy named Marcus, who
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
who apparently handled commercial real estate for Martina's construction, leaned in with what looked like genuine curiosity. "So you're basically trying to replace plastic and foam packaging with recyclable alternatives. That's interesting, but isn't the cost prohibitive? I mean, clients care about their bottom line first, environmental impact second." I'd heard this question 1,000 times, and I had a well-rehearsed answer about long-term cost savings and consumer demand for sustainable options. But before I could launch into my pitch, Jessica jumped in. "Alex is really passionate about this stuff. It's admirable really how committed you are to your ideals." The way she said it, ideals sounded like a synonym for naive fantasies. The conversation drifted to other topics, and I found myself on the periphery again, nursing a beer and watching everyone else connect over shared experiences I didn't have. Jessica was holding court, telling some story about landing a major client for the company. Everyone laughed at the right moments and asked follow-up questions that showed they understood her world in ways they never would understand mine. I excused myself and wandered toward the appetizer table, where I ran into my cousin Maria, who I hadn't seen in months. She was 8 years older than me, and had always treated me more like a nephew than a peer, which felt especially pronounced now that I was pushing 30 and still struggling to get my life together. "Alex, honey, how are you?" she asked, giving me the kind of hug that felt more like an obligation than affection. "I heard you're still doing that packaging thing. That's so sweet that you're following your dreams." Sweet, like I was a child playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. "It's going well, actually. We're gaining some real traction with investors and potential clients." The lie came easily now. I'd been telling it so often that sometimes I almost believed it myself. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You know, if it doesn't work out, your dad would always have a place for you at the company. Jessica's doing so well there, and I'm sure there's room for both of his kids." She patted my arm like she was comforting a disappointed child. "Sometimes the family path is the right path, you know." I nodded and smiled and made non-committal sounds, while inside something twisted with frustration. Everyone assumed my business was a phase, a young person's folly that I'd eventually outgrow and abandon for the safety of working for Dad. They couldn't conceive that I might actually succeed on my own terms, or that success might look different from what they'd achieved. The evening continued like that, one awkward interaction after another. I spoke with relatives who asked about my love life and suggested I needed to find a nice girl and settle down. I endured conversations with Dad's golf buddies, who offered unsolicited business advice based on their experiences from decades ago. I watched Jessica effortlessly network and charm everyone, while I stood in corners feeling like an imposter in my own face. When dinner was announced, I followed the crowd into the dining room, expecting to sit with my parents and Jessica at the main table. That's how it had always worked at family events. But as I approached the head table, Mom looked up with a slight frown of confusion. "Oh, Alex, honey, I'm sorry, we had to make some adjustments to the seating arrangements at the last minute." She gestured toward a smaller table near the back of the room, close to the kitchen doors where the catering staff bustled back and forth. "You'll be over there with your cousin's kids. I thought you might enjoy sitting with people your own age." I looked at the table she'd indicated and saw my teenage cousins, ranging in age from 16 to 21. The kids' table. At my father's 60th birthday party, I'd been relegated to the kids' table like I was still in high school. My stomach dropped, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Around us, the adult family members were taking their seats at the main tables, engaged in sophisticated conversation about business deals and political developments and vacation plans to Europe. "Mom, I'm 29 years old," I said quietly, hoping to avoid making a scene. "I think I can handle sitting with the adults." She looked genuinely confused by my objection. "Sweetie, it's not about age, it's just that those tables are for people in the business, and the clients, and, well, you know how these things work. Besides, you'll have more fun with the kids. They think you're so cool with your startup and everything." Cool, like I was an interesting novelty rather than a serious businessman. Like my 3 years of grinding, learning, failing, and trying again were entertainment for teenagers who still lived at home. I glanced over at the main table where Dad was holding court with Uncle Carlos and some other business associates. Jessica sat to his right, animated and engaged in whatever conversation was happening. There was an empty chair to his left, where I'd assumed I'd be sitting. "Who's sitting there?" I asked, nodding toward the chair. Mom followed my gaze. "Oh, that's for Marcus. Jessica's friend from her MBA program. Your father wanted to discuss some potential opportunities with him. You understand, don't you, honey?" I understood perfectly. Jessica's friend, someone who'd been in our family's orbit for maybe 6 months, raided a seat at the head table, while the son who'd spent 29 years as a Martinez was banished to sit with teenagers. It wasn't about business connections or age appropriateness. It was about who they took seriously and who they saw as a real adult worthy of respect. I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. I could make a scene, demand my rightful place at the family table, and probably ruin Dad's birthday party in the process. I could quietly accept the humiliation and spend the evening making small talk with kids who were probably wondering why their weird older cousin was sitting with them. Or I could leave, which would definitely cause drama and give everyone more ammunition for their belief that I was immature and unstable. "Of course I understand," I said finally, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "No problem at all." I walked over to the kids' table, where my teenage cousins greeted me, with a mixture of politeness and bewilderment. They were good kids, but the age gap made conversation awkward. They asked about my business with the kind of genuine curiosity that teenagers have for adults who seem to be doing something different, but they lacked the context to really understand what I was trying to build. From my seat, I had a perfect view of the main table. I watched Dad laugh at something Marcus said. I saw Jessica lean in to contribute to whatever business discussion was happening, her face serious and engaged. I observed Mom playing the perfect hostess, making sure everyone felt welcome and important. Everyone except me. The evening dragged on through multiple courses of overpriced food that I barely tasted. I made conversation with my young cousins about school and their summer plans, and their thoughts about college and careers. They were sweet kids, but sitting with them reinforced the message that I wasn't considered a real adult by my own family. When they talked about their future plans, they spoke with the kind of optimism that comes from having safety nets and family businesses to fall back on. When they asked about mine, I found myself editing my story, making it sound less desperate and uncertain than it really was. During Dad's speech, I watched from the back of the room as he thanked everyone for coming and talked about the importance of family and legacy. He mentioned the business he'd built and how proud he was to see it continuing with the next generation. His eyes found Jessica at the head table, and his smile was radiant with paternal pride. "My daughter Jessica has brought fresh ideas and energy to Martinez Construction, and I know she'll help us reach even greater heights in the years to come." The room erupted in applause, and Jessica beamed with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Dad's gaze swept the room, and for a moment I thought he might mention me too, might acknowledge his other child, who was also trying to build something meaningful. But his eyes passed over the kids' table without seeming to register that I was there. After the speech, people began mingling again, and I seized the opportunity to step outside, onto the terrace. The cool evening air felt like a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I pulled out my phone, partly to check the time, and partly just to have something to do with my hands. That's when I saw the missed call notification. The number wasn't in my contacts, but I recognized the New York area code. My heart started beating faster as I listened to the voicemail. "Hi Alex, this is Jennifer Walsh from Forbes magazine. I'm calling about your application for our Young Entrepreneurs to Watch's feature. We'd love to schedule a phone interview for next week to discuss your sustainable packaging company. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." We're very interested in your story. I stood there on the terrace, phone still pressed to my ear, even though the voicemail had ended, trying to process what I'd just heard. Forbes magazine. Forbes wanted to interview me about my business, wanted to feature me as a young entrepreneur to watch. After 3 years of rejection letters, missed opportunities, and people treating my work like a hobby, one of the most respected business publications in the world thought my story was worth telling. My hands were shaking slightly as I replayed the message to make sure I'd heard it correctly. Jennifer Walsh from Forbes, interested in my sustainable packaging company, wanted to schedule an interview. The timing felt almost surreal, sitting at the kids' table at my father's birthday party, while Forbes magazine called to discuss my business achievements. I looked back through the windows at the party inside. I could see Dad still surrounded by his business associates, Jessica still glowing with confidence and belonging, Mom still orchestrating the perfect family celebration. They had no idea that while they'd been dismissing me as the family disappointment, the business world was starting to take notice of what I'd been building. Part of me wanted to march back inside and announce the call to everyone, to see their faces when they realized that maybe my cardboard box business wasn't such a joke after all. But something held me back. This moment belonged to me, and I wasn't ready to share it with people who'd spent the evening making me feel small and irrelevant. Instead, I stayed on the terrace and called the number back, even though it was probably too late on the East Coast for anyone to answer. I got voicemail, as expected, but leaving a message felt like taking action, like moving forward instead of wallowing in family drama. Hi Jennifer, this is Alex Martinez, returning your call about the Forbes interview. I'm very excited about the opportunity and would love to schedule a time to speak next week. You can reach me at this number anytime. Thank you for your interest in my company. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, which had become a dangerous emotion in my entrepreneurial journey, but validation. Someone outside my family circle saw value in what I was doing, saw potential where my relatives saw naive idealism. I walked back into the country club, with my phone still warm in my hand, the Forbes voicemail playing on repeat in my mind. The party continued around me, as if nothing had changed, but everything felt different now. The crystal chandeliers seemed brighter, the conversations less important, the whole elaborate celebration suddenly small, compared to what had just happened on that terrace. Jessica spotted me first, as I made my way back to the kids' table. She was standing near the dessert station with Marcus and a few other young professionals from Dad's company, their laughter carrying across the room. When she saw me, she waved me over with the kind of enthusiasm that felt genuine but also performative, like she was demonstrating to her friends what a good sister she was. There you are, we were wondering where you disappeared to. She handed me a small plate with a slice of Dad's birthday cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, that probably cost more per slice than I spent on groceries in a week. Marcus was just asking about your packaging business. I told him you could explain it better than I could. Marcus turned toward me with polite interest, the kind of expression people wear when they're about to listen to something they don't expect to find particularly engaging. He was tall and well-dressed, with the sort of confident bearing that came from never having to worry about making rent, or whether his next business call would result in a yes or another polite rejection. Jessica mentioned you're working on sustainable alternatives to traditional packaging, he said, taking a sip of what looked like an expensive whiskey. That's an interesting niche. How's the market responding? I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with these conversations. How do you explain 3 years of grinding, learning, failing, and slowly building something meaningful to someone who's never had to fight for credibility? How do you convey the importance of environmental responsibility to people who measure success only in immediate profit margins? It's been challenging, I admitted, deciding on honesty over the usual polished pitch. Most companies are still focused on short-term costs rather than long-term environmental impact. But we're starting to see shifts in consumer demand that are forcing businesses to reconsider their packaging choices. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I can see the appeal from a marketing perspective. Sustainability is definitely trending right now. But what about scalability? Can you actually compete with established packaging companies on price and volume? Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in with her characteristic enthusiasm. Alex is really passionate about this stuff. It's amazing how dedicated you can be to something you believe in, even when it's not necessarily practical. She smiled at me affectionately, but her words hit like a gentle slap. Passionate but not practical. Dedicated but not successful. She meant it as a compliment, but it reinforced the narrative that my work was more about idealism than business sense. Actually, I said, feeling a surge of confidence from the Forbes call still fresh in my memory. We've been getting some significant interest from major retailers who are looking to differentiate themselves in the market. Companies are starting to realize that environmental responsibility isn't just a trend, it's becoming a business necessity. Marcus raised an eyebrow, and I could see him recalibrating his assessment slightly. Which retailers, if you don't mind me asking? I hesitated for a moment. The truth was that most of our significant interest consisted of preliminary conversations and letters of intent rather than signed contracts. But something about the Forbes call had shifted my perspective on how to talk about my business. Instead of focusing on what we hadn't achieved yet, I could highlight the genuine progress we were making. I can't name specific companies due to confidentiality agreements. I said, which was technically true for one potential client, but we're in advanced discussions with several major chains about pilot programs for their private label product. Jessica looked impressed, despite herself, and Marcus seemed genuinely interested. For the first time in our conversation, one of the other young professionals, a woman named Carmen, who worked in marketing for Martinez Construction, leaned in to join the discussion. That's fascinating, Carmen said. We've been getting more questions from clients about sustainable building materials and practices. Maybe there's some crossover potential between what you're doing and what we offer. For a moment I felt a flicker of hope that maybe my family's business world and my own weren't as incompatible as I'd always assumed. Maybe there were ways to bridge the gap between their traditional approach and my environmental focus. But before I could explore that thought further, Uncle Carlos appeared at Jessica's shoulder with his usual booming voice and larger-than-life presence. Jessica, Mia, your father wants to introduce you to the Hendersons. They're thinking about a major renovation project, and he wants you to give them the charm offensive. He winked at her, then noticed me standing there. Alex, how's the box business, kid? At 29, with 3 years of entrepreneurial experience under my belt, Uncle Carlos still called me kid and reduced my business to boxes. I felt the familiar frustration rising, but I pushed it down and forced a smile. It's going well, Uncle Carlos. We're actually expanding into new markets and working with some major retailers. I tried to keep my voice even and professional, to match the tone I'd use in a real business meeting. That's great, Mia. You know, if you ever want to learn about real business, your dad could always use another smart Martinez in the company. Right, Jessica? Jessica shifted uncomfortably, and I could see her torn between loyalty to me and her natural inclination to agree with Uncle Carlos. She'd never had to choose between family expectations and personal dreams, because her dreams had always aligned perfectly with what the family wanted. Alex is doing his own thing, Uncle Carlos, she said diplomatically. He's building something from scratch, which takes a lot of courage. Courage. Another word that sounded like praise, but carried undertones of foolishness. As if what I was doing required bravery, precisely because it was impractical and likely to fail. I wondered if anyone in my family would ever see my business as anything more than an expensive hobby or a phase I'd eventually outgrow. Uncle Carlos clapped me on the shoulder, with enough force to make me take a step forward. Well, you know where to find us when you're ready to join the real world. He laughed as if he'd made a brilliant joke, then guided Jessica away toward the Hendersons, leaving me standing with Marcus and Carmen. Marcus cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the family dynamics he'd just witnessed. Your uncle seems direct. That's one way to put it, I said, taking a larger bite of cake than I'd intended. The sweetness felt cloying now, too rich and artificial. He means well, but he doesn't really understand what I'm trying to build. Carmen studied my face with what looked like genuine sympathy. It must be hard, trying to establish yourself in a completely different field from your family. Do they support what you're doing? The question caught me off guard with its directness. Most people danced around family dynamics, especially at events like this, where everyone was supposed to be celebrating togetherness and success. But Carmen seemed genuinely curious, rather than just making conversation. They want me to be successful, I said carefully, but I think they have different ideas about what success looks like. Before Carmen could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and someone tapped a microphone at the front of the room. Dad stood at the head table, looking distinguished and comfortable in front of the crowd. This was his element, commanding a room full of people who respected his achievements and wanted to hear what he had to say. I want to thank everyone again for being here tonight. Dad began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. 60 years is a milestone that makes a man reflect on what really matters. Family legacy, the work we leave behind for the next generation. I found myself paying attention, despite my earlier frustration with being relegated to the kids' table. Whatever our differences, Dad had built something impressive from nothing. He'd immigrated to this country with limited English and no connections, worked construction jobs during the day, and learned business at night, and eventually built Martinez Construction into one of the most respected companies in Riverside County. When I started this company 35 years ago, Dad continued, I had a vision of creating something that would outlast me. Something my children could be proud of, and maybe even continue building long after I'm gone. His eyes found Jessica at the head table, and his expression softened with unmistakable pride. My daughter Jessica has already brought so much innovation and energy to our company. She understands that business isn't just about profit margins and contracts. It's about relationships, community, building something meaningful that serves people's needs. The room erupted in applause, and Jessica beamed with the kind of happiness that comes from public recognition by someone whose opinion matters more than anyone else's. I clapped too, because despite everything, I was proud of my sister's success. She'd earned her place in the family business through hard work and genuine talent, not just nepotism. But as Dad continued his speech, talking about legacy and the next generation, I noticed that his gaze never wandered to the back of the room, where I sat with the teenagers. He spoke about family and building something meaningful, but his definition of meaningful seemed to exclude anything that didn't fit within the Martinez Construction framework. I know some young people today think they need to reinvent everything, Dad said, and I felt my stomach tighten with anticipation. They want to change the world instead of learning from the people who came before them. But real success comes from understanding that some foundations are worth building on, not tearing down. The words felt aimed directly at me, even though Dad's eyes remained focused on the main tables where his business
Associates and Jessica sat. Real success. Foundations worth building on. The implication was clear. My sustainable packaging business was an attempt to reinvent something that didn't need reinventing. A rejection of the wisdom he'd accumulated over decades of actual achievement. I felt heat rising in my cheeks and took a deep breath to keep my expression neutral. Around me, the teenagers at my table seemed oblivious to any subtext, applauding politely when Dad finished his speech. But I caught Carmen watching me from across the room, her expression thoughtful and sympathetic. As the formal part of the evening wound down and people began moving around again, I found myself back on the terrace, needing air and space to process what had just happened. The Forbes call had given me a moment of validation, but Dad's speech had reminded me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a wild moment I hoped it might be Jennifer Walsh from Forbes with additional information about the interview. Instead, it was from Sam Chen, my best friend and business partner, who'd been working late in our shared office space downtown. How's the family party? Did you charm all the construction bigwigs into buying sustainable packaging? I smiled despite my mood. Sam understood my family dynamics better than anyone, partly because his own parents had initially been skeptical of his decision to leave his stable engineering job to start a business with me. But the Chens had come around once they saw our dedication and early progress, while my family seemed to become more entrenched in their skepticism with each passing month. Currently sitting at the kids' table while Dad explains to everyone how young people today don't understand real success, I texted back. Ouch, want me to call with a fake emergency so you can escape early? I considered the offer seriously. It would be easy to claim some business crisis that required my immediate attention to leave the party with my dignity intact and avoid any more awkward conversations about my future prospects. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the Forbes call, or maybe it was just stubbornness, but I wasn't ready to retreat yet. Thanks, but I'm going to stick it out. This is Dad's night, and I want to be here for that. You're a better person than me. Text if you need extraction. I put my phone away and took a moment to compose myself before going back inside. The party was in full swing now, with people moving freely between the dining room and the bar area, conversations flowing as freely as the expensive wine. I noticed Marcus talking animatedly with Dad near the windows, probably discussing the development opportunities Jessica had mentioned earlier. That's when I saw her approaching, weaving through the crowd with purpose. Carmen had a fresh drink in her hand and a determined expression that suggested she'd been thinking about our earlier conversation. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" she asked, gesturing toward a quieter corner near the bookshelf that lined one wall of the country club's main room. "Of course," I said, curious about what she wanted to discuss. We found a spot away from the main flow of traffic, and Carmen leaned against the bookshelf with the casualness of someone who was comfortable in professional social situations but also knew how to cut through small talk when necessary. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about sustainable packaging and changing consumer demands," she began. "I work in marketing for your dad's company, so I spend a lot of time researching trends and trying to anticipate what clients will want next." I nodded, not sure where she was going with this but grateful for someone who seemed to be taking my work seriously. "The construction industry is notoriously slow to change," she continued, "but we're starting to see real pressure from both residential and commercial clients who want sustainable building practices. Green certifications, renewable materials, reduced environmental impact during construction." "That makes sense," I said. "Consumer awareness about environmental issues is reaching a tipping point where it's affecting purchasing decisions across all industries." Carmen smiled, and I got the impression that she'd been waiting for someone to have this kind of conversation with. "Exactly, and here's what I find interesting about your situation. You're building expertise in sustainable business practices at exactly the moment when traditional industries like construction are going to need that expertise." I felt a spark of excitement at the direction this conversation was heading. "You think there might be overlap between what I'm doing and what Martinez Construction could offer clients?" "I think there might be more than overlap," Carmen said, lowering her voice slightly. "I think you might be ahead of the curve on something that's going to become essential for companies like ours. The question is whether anyone here is ready to see that yet." Before I could respond, Jessica appeared beside us with her characteristic perfect timing. She'd clearly been making the rounds, playing the role of gracious daughter and company representative, but now she looked genuinely tired in a way that suggested the performance was wearing on her. "There you are," she said, including both Carmen and me in her greeting. "I was hoping to catch up with you before the evening gets too late. How are you holding up with all the family chaos?" It was a loaded question, and I could see Jessica weighing how honest she wanted to be in front of Carmen. My sister had always been skilled at reading social situations and adjusting her approach accordingly. "It's been an interesting evening," I said, diplomatically. "Dad seems to be enjoying himself, which is what matters." Jessica studied my face with the kind of attention that reminded me we'd been siblings for 29 years, that she knew when I was putting on a polite front. I noticed Uncle Carlos being his usual subtle self earlier. I hope he wasn't too obnoxious about the family business thing. Carmen shifted slightly, clearly sensing undercurrents she wasn't privy to but politely staying quiet while we navigated whatever family dynamic was playing out. "Uncle Carlos is Uncle Carlos," I said. "I'm used to it by now." "You shouldn't have to be used to it," Jessica said, and there was something in her voice that surprised me. A note of frustration or protectiveness that I hadn't expected. "Your business is legitimate, Alex. Just because it's different from what Dad and Uncle Carlos understand doesn't make it less valid." The comment caught me off guard. Jessica had always been supportive in general terms, but she'd never directly challenged the family narrative about my career choices. I wondered if something had shifted for her tonight, or if she'd been thinking about these dynamics more than she'd let on. "I appreciate that," I said, meaning it more than I'd expected to. "Sometimes it feels like I'm speaking a different language when I try to explain what I'm working on." Carmen nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually pretty common when someone is innovating in a traditional industry space. The people who are already successful doing things one way have trouble seeing the value in alternative approaches, even when those alternatives might be more effective long-term." Jessica looked at Carmen with newfound interest. "You think Alex's approach might be more effective than traditional business methods?" "I think Alex is building expertise in areas that are going to become increasingly important for all businesses," Carmen said carefully. "Sustainability isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It's becoming a competitive necessity." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine I'd been nursing all evening. Here was someone who understood not just what I was trying to build, but why it mattered.
Someone who could see the bigger picture that my family seemed unable or unwilling to recognize. The problem, I said, feeling bold enough to be completely honest, is that it's hard to get people to invest in long-term thinking when they're focused on immediate returns. My family sees sustainable packaging as an expensive idealistic experiment rather than a smart business strategy. Jessica winced slightly, clearly recognizing the truth in what I'd said. They're not wrong about the financial challenges, though. Starting any new business is risky, and adding the complexity of sustainable practices makes it even harder. Of course it's harder, I agreed, but that's exactly why there's an opportunity. If it were easy, everyone would already be doing it. The difficulty is what creates the competitive advantage for companies that figure it out first. Carmen was nodding enthusiastically now. That's exactly the kind of forward thinking that established companies need but rarely develop internally. They're too invested in existing systems to see alternatives clearly. I looked around the room, taking in the expensive decorations, the well-dressed crowd, the atmosphere of established success and traditional achievement. Everyone here had followed conventional paths to prosperity, had built their careers on proven models and established relationships. There was nothing wrong with that approach, but it also meant there was little room for the kind of innovation that required questioning fundamental assumptions. My phone buzzed again, and this time when I glanced at it, I saw an email notification that made my heart skip. The sender was Jennifer Walsh from Forbes, and the subject line read, "Interview Scheduling Young Entrepreneurs Feature." I opened the email as discreetly as possible, aware that both Jessica and Carmen were still talking but suddenly unable to focus on their conversation. Jennifer had sent detailed information about the interview process, including a list of topics they wanted to cover and a proposed schedule for the following week. At the bottom of the email was a note that made me read it twice to make sure I understood correctly. "We're particularly interested in your company's innovative approach to sustainable packaging and how you've managed to gain traction in a challenging market. Your story fits perfectly with our focus on entrepreneurs who are building businesses that address significant environmental and social challenges while achieving financial success." Financial success. Forbes magazine thought my business represented financial success, not just idealistic experimentation. They saw sustainable packaging as an innovative business strategy, not an expensive hobby. The validation felt almost overwhelming after an evening of subtle and not so subtle dismissals from my own family. "Alex, are you okay?" Jessica's voice brought me back to the present moment. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked up to find both her and Carmen watching me with concern. For a moment I considered telling them about the Forbes call and email, sharing the news that might finally prove to my family that my business was gaining legitimate recognition. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of being seated at the kids' table, or Dad's speech about young people who thought they needed to reinvent everything, or 3 years of having my work treated as a phase I'd eventually outgrow. "Just checking messages," I said, putting my phone away. "Sorry, where were we?" Carmen gave me a look that suggested she didn't entirely believe my casual dismissal, but she picked up the conversation thread smoothly. "We were talking about how established companies need outside perspective to innovate effectively." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, ranging from sustainable business practices to family dynamics to the challenges of entrepreneurship in traditional industries. I found myself genuinely enjoying the discussion, particularly Carmen's insights about market trends and Jessica's surprisingly thoughtful questions about the intersection of environmental responsibility and business strategy. But underneath my engagement with the conversation, I was acutely aware of the Forbes email sitting in my phone, a secret validation that I wasn't ready to share yet. Part of me wanted to savor the moment, to hold on to the knowledge that someone outside my family circle saw real value in what I'd been building. Another part of me was already anticipating how satisfying it would be to eventually reveal this recognition to people who'd spent the evening treating me like a naive idealist. As the party began winding down and people started saying their goodbyes, I found myself back at the kids' table, gathering my things and preparing to leave. My teenage cousins had long since been collected by their parents, and I sat alone for a moment, reflecting on an evening that had been both frustrating and enlightening. Dad was still holding court near the bar, saying goodbye to business associates and accepting congratulations on a successful celebration. Mom was coordinating with the catering staff about cleanup and leftover arrangements. Jessica was exchanging contact information with several people she'd met, building her professional network with the kind of natural ease that I'd always envied.
I stood up and walked over to say goodbye to my parents, steeling myself for one final round of awkward small talk about my future plans, and when I was going to get serious about my career. But as I approached, I heard Dad talking to Uncle Carlos about the evening's conversations. "Marcus seems like a sharp kid," Dad was saying. "Jessica's got good instincts about people. I'm thinking we should bring him in on the Henderson project, see how he handles a major client relationship." "Good call," Uncle Carlos replied. "It's nice to see young people who understand how business really works, who aren't trying to reinvent the wheel just because they can." I paused just outside their conversation, not intentionally eavesdropping but caught by the familiar themes. Marcus, who'd been at the party for 4 hours, and had impressed them with his conventional business sense. Young people who understood how business really works, as opposed to those who were trying to reinvent the wheel unnecessarily. "Bob, you ready to head out?" Mom appeared at Dad's elbow, looking tired but satisfied with how the evening had gone. "The catering staff can handle the rest of the cleanup." Dad nodded, then noticed me standing nearby. "Alex, there you are. Thank you for coming tonight, Mijo. I know these family things aren't always your favorite, but it means a lot to have you here." The comment was generous and affectionate, and I felt a familiar pang of love mixed with frustration. Dad wasn't a bad person, and he wasn't intentionally cruel. He genuinely cared about me and wanted me to be happy and successful. The problem was that his definition of success was so narrow that it couldn't accommodate what I was trying to build. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, giving him a hug that felt warm and genuine, despite everything that had happened that evening. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I hope the next 60 years are just as good." He patted my back with the kind of affection that reminded me of being a kid, when his approval had been the most important thing in my world. "Thank you, son. And remember what I said about always having a place for you at the company. The offer stands whenever you're ready." I nodded and smiled, not trusting myself to respond verbally. The offer was meant kindly, but it also reinforced the assumption that my current path was temporary, that I'd eventually come to my senses and accept the safety of working for the family business. Mom hugged me next, her embrace smelling like expensive perfume, and the faint scent of wine. "Drive safely, sweetheart. And call me this week, okay? We should have lunch soon and catch up properly." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. Despite the evening's frustrations, I loved my parents and wanted to maintain our relationship even if we disagreed about my career choices. Jessica appeared beside us, as I was saying my final goodbyes, looking like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to phrase it. We'd had several meaningful conversations throughout the evening, and I could tell she was processing some of the dynamics she'd observed. "Walk me to my car," she asked, and I nodded. We made our way through the country club's elegant lobby, and out into the cool night air. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few expensive cars belonging to the last guests and staff members. Jessica's BMW was parked near the front entrance, while my Honda Civic was in the back section where I'd hoped it would be less conspicuous. "Alex, I want to say something, and I hope you'll hear me out." Jessica began as we walked slowly toward her car. "I know tonight was probably frustrating for you. The seating arrangements, Uncle Carlos being obnoxious, Dad's speech about young people needing to learn from previous generations." I was surprised by her directness. Jessica had always been diplomatic, skilled at navigating family dynamics, without creating conflict or taking sides too explicitly. "It wasn't my favorite evening," I admitted. "But I'm glad I came. Dad deserved to have both his kids here for his birthday." Jessica stopped walking and turned to face me fully. "You're being generous, and that's part of the problem. You're always so gracious about being treated like an afterthought, and I think that makes it easier for everyone to keep doing it." The observation caught me off guard. I'd thought I was being mature and family-oriented by not making a scene about the kids' table, or Dad's dismissive comments. But Jessica was suggesting that my politeness was actually enabling the very treatment I found frustrating. "What do you think I should do differently?" I asked genuinely. "I think you should stop minimizing what you've accomplished," she said. "You've built a business from nothing, you're addressing real environmental problems, and you're gaining traction with clients and investors. That's impressive, Alex. That deserves respect, not condescension." I felt a warmth in my chest at hearing my sister acknowledge my achievements so clearly. "It means a lot to hear you say that." "I should have said it sooner," Jessica replied. "And I should have spoken up more tonight when people were being dismissive. I'm sorry about that." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and I found myself thinking about how the evening might have been different if I'd had Jessica's explicit support from the beginning. Not that her approval should have been necessary for me to feel confident about my work, but family dynamics were complicated, and having an ally would have changed the energy of every conversation. "Can I tell you something?" I said, feeling bold enough to share what had been building in my mind all evening. "Of course, I got a call tonight. Forbes magazine wants to interview me about my business for a feature on young entrepreneurs to watch." The words came out in a rush, and I realized I'd been holding my breath waiting to tell someone. Jessica's eyes widened, and her face broke into a genuine smile. "Alex, that's incredible." "Forbes magazine? That's huge." "I know," I said, unable to suppress my own grin. "I can't quite believe it's real. They want to talk next week about sustainable packaging and how we've built traction in a challenging market." "This is exactly what I was talking about," Jessica said excitedly. "This is real recognition from serious people in the business world. Forbes doesn't interview random startups with no potential." The validation felt even better coming from Jessica, who understood business success in ways that I sometimes doubted I did. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time all evening, I felt genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished rather than defensive about what I hadn't achieved yet. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" she asked. "This would have been perfect to mention when Uncle Carlos was being obnoxious about your box business." I considered the question seriously. I guess I wanted to process it first, to make sure it was real before I shared it. And honestly, after being seated at the kids' table and listening to Dad's speech about young people who think they need to reinvent everything, I wasn't sure anyone would see it as the validation I think it is. Jessica frowned. "You think Dad and Mom wouldn't be excited about you being featured in Forbes?" "I think they'd find a way to minimize it." I said, "Maybe say it was just a fluff piece about trendy startups, or suggest that media attention doesn't necessarily translate to real business success. They've gotten pretty good at explaining why my achievements don't count the way traditional achievements do." The comment clearly bothered Jessica, and I could see her processing the implications of what I'd said. She'd always been the family favorite, the one whose successes were celebrated without qualification or caveat. The idea that my achievements might be consistently diminished was probably not something she'd fully considered before. "That's not okay," she said finally. "And I don't think you should let them do that. This Forbes interview is a big deal, and you should own that." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination that surprised me with its intensity. "You're right, I've been so focused on trying to earn their approval that I've forgotten I don't actually need it to be successful." We reached Jessica's car, and she unlocked it with a soft beep that echoed through the quiet parking lot. But instead of getting in, she leaned against the driver's side door, clearly not ready to end our conversation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Do you think I made the right choice, joining Dad's company instead of doing something on my own?" The question surprised me. Jessica had always seemed completely confident about her career path, perfectly suited for the family business, and happy with the recognition and success it brought her. "I think you made the choice that was right for you," I said carefully. "You're good at what you do, and you genuinely enjoy the work. That's more than a lot of people can say about their careers. But do you think I took the easy path?" she pressed. "Sometimes when I hear you talk about building something from scratch, dealing with all the uncertainty and rejection and financial stress, I wonder if I chose safety over challenge." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd missed during the evening's conversations. Underneath her confidence and success, there was a thread of uncertainty, maybe even envy, about the path I'd chosen. She'd gained everything she'd worked for, but maybe she wondered what she might have discovered about herself if she'd taken bigger risks. "There's nothing wrong with building on a strong foundation," I said. "Dad created something valuable, and you're making it better. That takes skill and vision too." "That you're creating something entirely new," Jessica said. "You're solving problems that other people haven't figured out how to solve yet. That's impressive in a way that improving an existing business isn't." I felt a shift in how I saw my sister, and maybe in how she saw herself. We'd both been comparing ourselves to the other, but from opposite directions. I'd envied her certainty and family approval, while she'd apparently envied my independence and innovation. "Maybe we're both doing what we're supposed to be doing," I suggested. "Maybe there isn't one right path, just different approaches to building something meaningful." Jessica smiled, but it was tinged with something that looked like wistfulness. "I hope so." Sometimes I feel like I know exactly what I'm doing, and sometimes I feel like I'm just following a script someone else wrote for me. The honesty was unexpected and touching. Jessica had always seemed so sure of herself, so perfectly aligned with family expectations and personal ambitions. Hearing her express doubt made her seem more human, more relatable than she'd been in years. "You could always write a different script," I said gently. "It's not too late to change direction if you want to." "I know," she said. "But it's scary to give up something good for something uncertain, even if the uncertain thing might be better." I understood exactly what she meant. The fear of leaving safety for uncertainty was something I lived with every day as an entrepreneur. The difference was that I'd never had the option of safety, so uncertainty had become familiar territory. "Well, for what it's worth," I said, "I think you're capable of succeeding at whatever you decide to do. You have all the skills and intelligence you'd need for any path you chose." "Thank you," Jessica said, and I could tell she meant it. "And Alex, I'm really proud of what you've built. I know I don't say that enough, but I am. And this Forbes thing is just the beginning. I can feel it." The conversation felt like a turning point, not just in my relationship with Jessica, but in how I thought about my place in the family. Maybe I didn't need everyone's approval to feel confident about my choices. Maybe having one person who truly understood and supported what I was doing was enough. "I should let you get home," I said, stepping back so she could get into her car. "Will you call me after the Forbes interview?" she asked. "I want to hear all about it." "Absolutely," I said. "And Jessica, thank you for tonight. For the conversation, for understanding what I'm trying to do. It means more than you know." She hugged me quickly, then got into her car and drove away, leaving me alone in the parking lot with my thoughts and the warm glow of her support. As I walked toward my own car, I pulled out my phone and reread the Forbes email one more time, feeling a sense of anticipation rather than anxiety about the upcoming interview. The evening had started with disappointment and frustration, but it was ending with clarity and determination. I knew exactly who I was, and what I was building, and I was ready to share that story with confidence, whether my audience was a journalist from Forbes or my own family members who still saw me as the kid at the kids' table. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The recognition would come, the business would grow, and the people who mattered would see the value in what I'd created. Tonight had been a reminder that sometimes the most important validation comes not from others, but from finally believing in yourself. The drive home felt different than usual. Instead of the familiar weight of family disappointment settling over me like a heavy blanket, I found myself energized by the combination of Jessica's unexpected support and the Forbes opportunity waiting in my inbox. The streets of Riverside were quiet at this hour, most of the evening traffic having cleared, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the soft hum of my Honda's engine. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, a modest collection of two-story buildings that housed mostly young professionals and graduate students. The contrast between this simple environment and the opulent country club I'd just left couldn't have been starker, but for the first time in months, that difference didn't feel like a judgment on my choices. It felt like authenticity. My apartment was small but organized, every piece of furniture carefully chosen for both function and cost-effectiveness. The living room doubled as my home office, with a desk positioned near the window where I could catch natural light during the day. Stacks of product samples lined one wall, examples of sustainable packaging solutions that represented months of research and development. To an outsider it might have looked cluttered or unprofessional, but to me every item told a story of progress and possibility. I kicked off my dress shoes and loosened my tie, then sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The Forbes email was still there, as real as it had been at the country club, but now I had the space and quiet to fully process what it meant. Jennifer Walsh wanted to discuss my company's innovative approach to sustainable packaging and how we'd managed to gain traction in a challenging market. Those words, innovative approach and gain traction, felt like recognition of everything I'd been working toward. But before I could get too lost in the excitement, I needed to do something I'd been putting off for weeks. I opened our business banking account and stared at the numbers on the screen. $347 in checking, with another $800 in our business savings account that was earmarked for next month's rent on our co-working space. The Forbes interview was an incredible opportunity, but it couldn't change the fundamental reality that my business was still running on fumes financially. I pulled up our spreadsheet of pending opportunities, the document that Sam and I updated
religiously with every lead, every conversation, every possibility that might turn into actual revenue. The list was longer than it had been 6 months ago, which was encouraging, but most items were still in preliminary stages. Letters of intent that hadn't become purchase orders. Pilot programs that were still being evaluated. Interest that hadn't yet translated into commitments. The sustainable packaging market was exactly as challenging as everyone in my family believed it to be. We were asking companies to pay more upfront for packaging solutions that would save them money and environmental impact over time, but corporate purchasing decisions rarely operated on that kind of long-term thinking. We were competing against established suppliers with decades of relationships and economies of scale that we couldn't match yet, but we were also solving real problems that traditional packaging companies couldn't or wouldn't address. Every week brought new stories about plastic pollution, corporate sustainability commitments, and consumer demand for environmentally responsible products. The market was shifting in our direction, slowly but inevitably, and companies that positioned themselves ahead of that shift would have significant advantages over those that waited. I opened a new document and began outlining talking points for the Forbes interview. Jennifer had mentioned specific topics they wanted to cover, and I wanted to be prepared to discuss not just our products but our broader vision for transforming how businesses think about packaging. This wasn't just about cardboard boxes, as Uncle Carlos had dismissively suggested. This was about reimagining the entire life cycle of product packaging, from sourcing sustainable materials to designing for recyclability to creating closed-loop systems that eliminated waste. My phone buzzed with another text from Sam. How did the escape go? Are you officially disowned or just mildly disappointed in? I smiled and typed back. Neither, actually. Got some unexpected support from Jessica, and something big happened that I'll tell you about tomorrow. Mysterious. I like it. Coffee at 8 before we dive into the Peterson proposal. Perfect. See you then. Sam Chen had been my closest friend since our first semester at UC Riverside, where we'd bonded over late-night study sessions and shared frustration with professors who seemed more interested in theoretical frameworks than practical applications. After graduation, Sam had taken a well-paying engineering job with a large manufacturing company while I'd pursued my MBA, but we'd stayed in touch and regularly discussed our shared interest in sustainable business practices. When I'd decided to start my packaging company, Sam had been the first person I'd called. He'd been making good money as an engineer, but he'd also been increasingly frustrated with his company's resistance to environmental considerations. The opportunity to build something from scratch, to create a business that aligned with his values while using his technical expertise, had been too appealing to resist. He'd quit his job and joined me as a co-founder 6 months after I'd started the company. Sam's parents, David and Michelle Chen, had initially been skeptical of his decision to leave a stable career for an uncertain startup venture. But unlike my family, they'd gradually come to understand and support what we were building. They'd even invested a small amount in our early funding round, not because they expected huge returns but because they believed in their son's judgment and wanted to support his dreams. The contrast between Sam's family dynamics and my own had become increasingly apparent over the past 2 years. The Chens asked thoughtful questions about our business strategy and celebrated our small victories with genuine enthusiasm. They worried about the financial risks, but they also respected Sam's expertise and trusted his decision-making. When we'd landed our first major client, Michelle had insisted on cooking a celebration dinner, and David had spent the evening asking detailed questions about our growth plans and market positioning. My family's response to the same milestone had been polite congratulations, followed by suggestions that one client didn't constitute a sustainable business model, and reminders that there would always be a place for me at Martinez Construction when I was ready to be realistic about my future. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen, a narrow galley space that was functional if not impressive. The refrigerator was mostly empty except for coffee creamer, leftover takeout, and the ingredients for the simple meals I'd learned to prepare during my lean startup years. I pulled out a beer and sat down on my small couch, finally allowing myself to fully process the emotional roller coaster of the evening. The kids' table had stung more than I'd wanted to admit, not because I needed to sit with the adults for status reasons, but because of what it represented about how my family saw me. At 29, with an MBA and 3 years of entrepreneurial experience, I was still being treated like a child whose opinions and achievements didn't warrant serious consideration. The placement had been symbolic of a deeper dismissal that I'd been trying to ignore for too long. But the Forbes call had changed something fundamental in how I thought about my situation. External validation from a respected business publication carried weight that family approval couldn't match. Forbes magazine thought my story was worth telling, my business worth featuring, my approach worth examining. That recognition gave me perspective on my family's skepticism that I'd never had before. Maybe the problem wasn't that I hadn't achieved enough to earn their respect. Maybe the problem was that their definition of achievement was too narrow to include what I was actually accomplishing. They valued traditional markers of success, steady employment, predictable income, clear hierarchies, and established business models. They couldn't see value in innovation that didn't fit those parameters, even when that innovation was gaining recognition from sources they themselves would normally respect. I thought about Jessica's unexpected support and her admission that she sometimes wondered if she'd chosen safety over challenge. Her honesty had revealed something I'd never considered, that the family path she'd taken might not be as fulfilling as it appeared from the outside. She had security and approval, but she might also have doubts about whether she was living up to her full potential. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I'd been envying Jessica's certainty and family support, she'd been questioning whether her choices reflected courage or convenience. We'd both been looking at each other's paths and wondering if the grass was greener, when maybe both approaches had their own rewards and limitations. My phone rang, startling me from my reflections. The caller ID showed Sam's name, which was unusual since we'd just texted and he rarely called this late unless something was urgent. "Hey, what's up?" I answered. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I had to call. I just got off the phone with my contact at Green Tech Solutions and I think we might have a breakthrough." Green Tech Solutions was a mid-sized company that specialized in environmentally friendly products for corporate clients. We'd been in discussions with them for 3 months about a potential partnership that could significantly expand our market reach. The conversations had been promising but slow, with multiple rounds of technical discussions and financial projections. "What kind of breakthrough?" I asked, sitting up straighter on the couch. "They want to move forward with a pilot program for their entire product line. Not just the small test batch we discussed originally, but a full-scale implementation that would be their primary packaging solution if it works out. We're talking about a 6-figure contract over the next year, with potential for expansion if the pilot succeeds." I felt my heart start beating faster. A 6-figure contract would solve our immediate financial pressures and provide the stability we needed to pursue larger opportunities. More importantly, it would prove that our business model could work at scale, that sustainable packaging wasn't just an idealistic experiment but a viable commercial strategy. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, needing confirmation that I wasn't misunderstanding the magnitude of what Sam was telling me. "Completely serious. They want to schedule a formal presentation next week where we'll outline the implementation timeline and finalize the contract terms." "Alex, this could be exactly what we've been working toward." The timing felt almost surreal. On the same evening that my family had relegated me to the kids' table and dismissed my work as impractical idealism, I was receiving news of both a Forbes interview and a potentially game-changing business contract. The universe seemed to be providing exactly the validation I needed, exactly when I needed it most. "This is incredible, Sam. Did they say what finally convinced them to move forward?" "That's the interesting part," Sam said. "Apparently their biggest client has been asking about sustainable packaging options because they're trying to improve their environmental credentials. Green Tech realized they could either find a partner who could provide those solutions or risk losing the client to a competitor who could. Our timing couldn't have been better." I walked to my window and looked out at the parking lot, where my Honda Civic sat among the other modest vehicles that belonged to people who were building their lives one careful decision at a time. 6 months ago, that car had felt like a symbol of everything I couldn't afford. Tonight it felt like a choice, a reflection of priorities that valued substance over appearance. "When do they want to do the presentation?" I asked. "Thursday afternoon." I know that's short notice, but they're moving quickly because their client is putting pressure on them to show progress on sustainability initiatives. "Thursday works. We've been preparing for this opportunity for months, so we should be ready." I paused, then decided to share the other news. "Sam, something else happened tonight. Forbes magazine called about featuring our company in an article about young entrepreneurs." There was silence on the other end of the line, then Sam's voice came back with barely contained excitement. "Forbes magazine, Alex, that's huge. When do they want to do the interview?" "Next week. I'm still processing it myself, but apparently they're interested in our innovative approach to sustainable packaging and how we've gained traction in a challenging market." "Gained traction," Sam repeated. That's exactly what we're doing with green tech. This Forbes article could come out right as we're launching our biggest contract yet. The timing is perfect for building momentum. I hadn't thought about the synergy between the two opportunities, but Sam was right. The Forbes article would provide credibility and visibility that could help us attract additional clients, while the green tech contract would demonstrate our ability to deliver results at scale. Together, they represented the kind of breakthrough moment that could transform our business from a struggling startup into a recognized player in the sustainable packaging market. How was the family party, by the way? Sam asked. Did you manage to charm Uncle Carlos into ordering sustainable packaging for all his construction projects? I laughed, remembering the conversation with Uncle Carlos that felt like it had happened days ago rather than hours. Let's just say the family reception was about what I expected. But I had some good conversations too, and I'm feeling more confident about our direction than I have in a while. Good, you deserve to feel confident. What we're building is important, and it's working. Anyone who can't see that is missing something obvious. After we hung up, I sat back down at my desk and opened my laptop again. The Forbes email was still there, but now it felt like part of a larger picture rather than an isolated stroke of luck. We were building something real, something valuable, something that was gaining recognition from both the business press and potential clients who needed the solutions we provided. I started drafting an email to Jennifer Walsh, confirming my availability for the interview and providing some additional background information about our company's mission and achievements. As I wrote, I found myself thinking about how to tell our story in a way that would resonate with Forbes readers while staying true to the values that had motivated me to start the business in the first place. The sustainable packaging industry existed at the intersection of environmental responsibility and business pragmatism. Companies were beginning to realize that sustainable practices weren't just about corporate social responsibility anymore. They were about competitive advantage in a market where consumers increasingly demanded environmental accountability. Our job was to make sustainable choices easier and more cost-effective than traditional alternatives. But beyond the business case, there was a personal mission that drove everything we did. I'd started this company because I believed that businesses had an obligation to consider their environmental impact, not just their profit margins. The packaging industry generated enormous amounts of waste that could be dramatically reduced through better design and material choices. If we could prove that sustainable packaging was not only possible but profitable, we could influence other companies to make similar changes. The Forbes interview would give me a platform to share that vision with a broader audience, to demonstrate that environmental responsibility and business success weren't mutually exclusive goals. The green tech contract would provide concrete evidence that our approach worked in practice, not just in theory. I finished the email to Jennifer Walsh and sent it, then opened a new document to begin preparing for the green tech presentation. We had 4 days to put together a comprehensive proposal that would convince them we could deliver on our promises at scale. The presentation needed to cover technical specifications, implementation timelines, cost projections, and quality assurance processes. But it also needed to tell a story about why sustainable packaging mattered and how their partnership with us would position them as leaders in their industry. Green Tech's decision to move forward wasn't just about finding a supplier, it was about aligning their business practices with their environmental values and meeting their clients' evolving expectations. As I worked on the presentation outline, I thought about the contrast between this moment and the evening I'd just experienced at the country club. Here in my small apartment, surrounded by product samples and business plans, I felt more at home than I had in the elegant dining room where my achievements were dismissed as impractical idealism. Success looked different than I'd imagined when I was younger. It wasn't about impressing people at expensive parties or earning approval from family members who measured achievement by traditional metrics. It was about building something meaningful, solving real problems, and creating value that extended beyond immediate profit margins. The kids' table had felt like a humiliation when it happened, but now it seemed like a clarifying moment. I didn't need to earn my place at the adult table by conforming to other people's expectations of what serious business looked like. I could build my own table, invite people who shared my values and vision, and create the kind of success that aligned with my priorities rather than theirs. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thank you for tonight's conversation. I've been thinking about what you said about writing different scripts. Maybe it's time for me to consider what I actually want rather than what I'm supposed to want." I typed back quickly. "You're capable of anything you decide to pursue, and whatever you choose, you'll have my support."
Same to you, I can't wait to hear about the Forbes interview. I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you. The exchange with Jessica felt like another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. We'd both been trapped by family expectations in different ways, but maybe we could help each other break free from those limitations. Her support meant more to me than approval from the rest of the family combined, partly because it came from someone who truly understood the business world we were both navigating. I worked on the green tech presentation until nearly midnight, outlining the key points we needed to cover and identifying the supporting materials we'd need to gather. The proposal would be the most comprehensive document we'd ever prepared, a detailed blueprint for how sustainable packaging could transform their operations while improving their environmental impact. When I finally closed the laptop and got ready for bed, I felt a sense of anticipation that had been missing from my life for months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and uncertainties, but it would also bring opportunities to move our business forward in ways that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. The Forbes interview would happen whether my family understood its significance or not. The green tech contract would move forward, based on our ability to deliver results, not on whether Uncle Carlos thought our business was legitimate. Success would be measured by our impact on clients and the environment, not by our ability to fit into traditional definitions of achievement. As I lay in bed, I thought about the conversation with Carmen at the party, her insight that I might be ahead of the curve on something that would become essential for traditional industries. The construction industry, like many others, was facing increasing pressure to adopt sustainable practices. Companies like Martinez Construction would eventually need partners who understood environmental requirements and could provide solutions that met both regulatory standards and client expectations. Maybe there would come a day when Dad's business would benefit from the expertise I was developing, when sustainable practices would be necessary for winning contracts rather than optional for feeling good about corporate responsibility. That day might be sooner than anyone in my family realized, and when it arrived, I'd be ready with solutions that could help them succeed. But for now I was focused on building my own success on my own terms. The Forbes interview would introduce our company to a national audience. The green tech contract would provide the financial stability and credibility we needed to pursue larger opportunities. And somewhere in the future, maybe my family would finally understand that what they'd dismissed as idealistic experimentation was actually strategic business positioning for an inevitable market shift. The last thing I remembered before falling asleep was the feeling of my phone in my hand at the country club, the moment when Jennifer Walsh's voicemail had changed everything about how I saw my situation. External validation couldn't replace internal confidence, but it could provide perspective that helped you see your achievements more clearly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had proven that the path I'd chosen was leading somewhere meaningful. The recognition would continue to grow, the business would expand, and the people who mattered would eventually see the value in what I'd been building all along. I woke up earlier than usual, energized by a combination of excitement and nervous anticipation about the day ahead. The morning light streaming through my bedroom window felt brighter than normal, or maybe that was just my mood reflecting back at me from everything around me. Today was the day I'd tell Sam about both the Forbes interview and begin preparing in earnest for what could be the biggest opportunity our company had ever received. The coffee shop where Sam and I met most mornings was a local place called Grind Coffee, tucked into a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was convenient to our co-working space and served excellent coffee at prices that fit our startup budget. The owner, Maria Santos, had gotten to know us over the past year and always asked about how the business was progressing with the kind of genuine interest that made the place feel like a community rather than just a transaction. I arrived first and ordered our usual drinks, then found our preferred table near the window where we could spread out laptops and papers without bothering other customers. Sam walked in exactly at 8, looking more energized than I'd seen him in weeks. The green tech opportunity had clearly given him the same boost of confidence and motivation that I was feeling. "AK, tell me everything about this mysterious big news," Sam said, as he sat down and took his first grateful sip of coffee, "and don't leave anything out." I told him about the Forbes call, the email with interview details, and Jennifer Walsh's interest in our innovative approach to sustainable packaging. Sam listened with growing excitement, occasionally interrupting with questions about the timeline and scope of the article. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair with a grin that was impossible to suppress. "This is exactly what I was talking about last night," he said. "The timing couldn't be better. We'll have Forbes covering our company right as we're launching our biggest contract. The credibility and visibility will be incredible for attracting new clients." That's what I was thinking too, I agreed, but I want to make sure we're prepared for both opportunities. The Forbes interview needs to position us as serious business leaders, and the green tech presentation needs to prove we can deliver on that positioning. Sam pulled out his laptop and opened our shared project management system, where we tracked all current initiatives and deadlines. Let's map out what we need to accomplish this week. The green tech presentation is Thursday, and when did Forbes want to schedule the interview? They suggested early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. I need to call Jennifer back today to confirm the timing and get more details about what they want to cover. We spent the next hour planning our week in detail, identifying the tasks that needed to be completed for the green tech presentation and the background research I should do before the Forbes interview. The presentation would require updated financial projections, technical specifications for their specific requirements, and a detailed implementation timeline that demonstrated our ability to scale up production. The Forbes interview would require a different kind of preparation. I needed to articulate our company's mission and vision in terms that would resonate with a business audience, provide concrete examples of our achievements and growth trajectory, and explain why sustainable packaging represented a significant market opportunity rather than a niche specialty. You know what I realized last night? Sam said as we reviewed our task list. We've been so focused on the challenges of building this business that we haven't taken enough time to appreciate what we've actually accomplished. 3 years ago, this company was just an idea you had in business school. Now we're talking to Forbes magazine and negotiating six-figure contracts. The observation hit me harder than I'd expected. Sam was right that we'd been so consumed with day-to-day survival and the next milestone that we hadn't stepped back to acknowledge how far we'd come. When I'd started the company, my goal had been to prove that sustainable packaging could be commercially viable. We were on the verge of doing exactly that, with national media attention and a major client contract that would validate everything we'd been working toward. It's funny, I said, last night at my dad's birthday party, I felt like such a failure compared to everyone else in my family. They've all achieved traditional markers of success, while I'm still trying to prove that my business is legitimate. But sitting here with you, looking at what we've built together, I feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Sam nodded thoughtfully. Family dynamics are complicated. Your parents and sister love you, but they're measuring your success against their own experiences and values. They can't see what you're building because it doesn't fit the patterns they recognize. Jessica is starting to understand though, I said, remembering our conversation in the parking lot. She even said she's been questioning whether she chose safety over challenge by joining the family business. I never thought she had any doubts about her path. Everyone has doubts, Sam said. The difference is whether you let those doubts paralyze you or motivate you to keep pushing forward. Jessica found a path that works for her, but maybe she's starting to see that there are other ways to build a meaningful career. We packed up our laptops and walked the 3 blocks to our co-working space, a converted warehouse that housed about 30 small businesses and freelance professionals. The energy in the building was palpable, with people pursuing everything from app development to graphic design to consulting services. Everyone was building something, taking risks, trying to create value in ways that didn't fit traditional employment models. Our section of the space consisted of 2 desk areas and a small conference room that we shared with another startup. The walls were covered with whiteboards filled with product diagrams, market analysis, and financial projections that told the story of our company's evolution. Product samples lined shelves along one wall, examples of the packaging solutions we'd developed for different types of clients. The physical space reflected our current reality, lean, functional, focused on results rather than appearances. We couldn't afford fancy offices or expensive furniture, but we had everything we needed to do the work that mattered. In some ways, the modest environment kept us grounded and reminded us that success would be measured by our impact on clients and the environment, not by how impressive our office looked. Sam immediately dove into updating our financial projections for the green tech presentation, while I called Jennifer Walsh to confirm the details for the Forbes interview. She answered on the second ring, her voice professional, but warm in the way that suggested genuine interest in our story. "Alex, thank you for getting back to me so quickly," Jennifer said. "I'm excited to learn more about your company and how you've managed to build traction in the sustainable packaging market. It's exactly the kind of innovation story our readers are interested in." We spent 15 minutes discussing the scope and format of the interview, which would be conducted by phone, and focus on our business model, growth strategy, and vision for the future of sustainable packaging. Jennifer asked thoughtful questions about our target market and competitive positioning that demonstrated she'd already done significant research on our industry. One thing I'm particularly interested in, Jennifer said, is how you've navigated the challenge of being a small company, competing against established players with much larger resources. What's your competitive advantage, and how do you convince clients to take a chance on a newer company? The question went straight to the heart of our business strategy. Our competitive advantage is that we're solving problems that established companies can't or won't address, I said. Large packaging companies are optimized for traditional materials and production methods. They can't easily pivot to sustainable alternatives without disrupting their existing operations and profit margins. And you built your company specifically around sustainable solutions from the beginning, Jennifer said, clearly following the logic. Exactly, we don't have legacy systems or existing client relationships that prevent us from innovating. We can move quickly, customize solutions for specific client needs, and focus entirely on environmental performance, rather than trying to balance sustainability with conventional profitability. Jennifer seemed pleased with the direction of our conversation, and we scheduled the formal interview for Tuesday morning. After we hung up, I felt confident that the article would position our company exactly as we wanted to be seen, as innovative leaders in a growing market, rather than idealistic experimenters trying to change an industry that didn't want to change. The rest of the day was consumed with preparation for the green tech presentation. Sam worked on technical specifications and production timelines, while I focused on the business case and implementation strategy. We'd presented to potential clients dozens of times over the past 2 years, but this felt different because of the scale and potential impact
of the opportunity. Green Tech Solutions wasn't just another client, they were a company whose endorsement could open doors to similar opportunities throughout their industry. If we could successfully implement sustainable packaging across their entire product line, we'd have a case study that would be compelling to other companies facing similar environmental pressures from their own clients. But success would require flawless execution on our part. We'd need to scale up our production capabilities, maintain quality standards under increased volume, and deliver results on the timeline we promised. The contract would stretch our resources and capabilities, but it would also prove that our business model could work at the level we'd always envisioned. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang with a call from Jessica. I stepped outside the co-working space to take it, curious about why she was calling during business hours. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, "but I wanted to follow up on our conversation last night. I've been thinking about what you said about writing different scripts, and I'm wondering if you'd be open to having coffee sometime this week to talk more about it." "Of course," I said, surprised but pleased by her initiative. "What's prompting this?" "Honestly, watching you last night made me realize how much I admire what you're doing," Jessica said. "You're building something that aligns with your values, even though it's difficult and uncertain. I'm successful at what I do, but I'm not sure I'm passionate about it the way you're passionate about your work." The conversation felt like a continuation of the vulnerability she'd shown in the parking lot, but now she seemed more determined to explore alternatives rather than just acknowledging doubts. "What would you want to do if you weren't working for Dad?" I asked. "That's the problem. I've been on this path for so long that I'm not sure what else I might be good at or interested in. I went straight from college to the family business, so I've never really tested myself in a different environment." I understood the dilemma. Jessica had been successful within a defined system, but that success might have prevented her from discovering other potential paths. She'd never had to take the kind of risks that revealed what she was truly capable of achieving. "Maybe we could brainstorm some possibilities," I suggested. "You have a lot of transferable skills that could apply to different industries or approaches, and there's no reason you'd have to make a dramatic change all at once." "I'd like that," Jessica said. "And Alex, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. The Forbes interview is amazing, but even without that recognition, what you've built is impressive. I should have said that a long time ago." After we hung up, I stood outside the co-working space for a moment, processing the unexpected shift in my relationship with Jessica. Growing up, we'd been close despite our different personalities and interests, but as adults, the distance between our career paths had created a corresponding distance in our personal relationship. Her newfound interest in my work and her questions about her own path felt like an opportunity to reconnect as peers rather than just siblings with little in common. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sam and I refined every aspect of the green tech presentation, anticipating questions and objections while crafting responses that demonstrated both our expertise and our commitment to delivering results. We practiced the presentation multiple times, timing each section and adjusting our approach based on what felt most persuasive and authentic. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that accompanies make or break opportunities. We dressed more formally than usual, gathered our materials one final time, and drove to Green Tech's offices in downtown Riverside. The building was modern and environmentally conscious, with solar panels on the roof and native landscaping that required minimal water. Even their physical space communicated values that aligned with what we were offering. The presentation went better than we'd dared to hope. The Green Tech team asked insightful questions that demonstrated genuine interest in both the technical and business aspects of our proposal. They seemed particularly impressed by our ability to customize solutions for their specific requirements and our track record of delivering on promises to existing clients. When we finished, the room was quiet for a moment as the Green Tech executives exchanged glances and processed what they'd heard. Then their CEO, Patricia Hoffman, leaned forward with a smile that suggested positive news. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," Patricia said. "Your approach addresses all of our technical requirements while positioning us as leaders in sustainable business practices. Assuming we can finalize the contract terms, we'd like to move forward with the partnership." The words felt surreal after months of uncertainty and financial pressure. Sam and I managed to maintain our professional composure during the final handshakes and scheduling discussions, but I could see the same barely contained excitement in his eyes that I was feeling. We drove back to the co-working space in stunned silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened. The Green Tech contract would transform our business from a struggling startup into a viable company with real growth potential. More importantly, it would prove that sustainable packaging wasn't just an idealistic experiment, but a practical solution that created value for clients while advancing environmental goals. "I can't believe we just landed a six-figure contract," Sam said as we sat in our small conference room, staring at the presentation materials we'd spent so much time perfecting. "I can't believe it either," I admitted. 3 days ago we were wondering how we'd make next month's rent. Now we're talking about scaling up production and hiring additional staff." The contrast between our current excitement and the dismissiveness I'd experienced at Dad's birthday party felt almost comical. While my family had been treating my business as an expensive hobby, we'd been building something that was about to validate every risk we'd taken and every sacrifice we'd made. But more than personal vindication, the Green Tech contract represented proof that the market was ready for the solutions we provided. Patricia Hoffman and her team hadn't chosen us because they wanted to feel good about their environmental impact. They'd chosen us because we offered the best combination of technical performance, cost-effectiveness, and strategic positioning for their business needs. That evening I called Jessica to share the news about the contract and confirm our coffee meeting for the following week. Her excitement was immediate and genuine, the kind of enthusiasm that reminded me why her support meant so much to me. "This is incredible, Alex," she said. "Forbes interview, major client contract, and it's all happening at once. It's like the universe is finally recognizing what you've been building." "It feels that way," I agreed. "But mostly it feels like validation that the approach we've been taking is sound. We're not just lucky, we're solving real problems that the market needs addressed. I hope Dad and Mom realize what they missed by not taking your work seriously sooner." Jessica said, "This kind of success doesn't happen by accident." The comment made me think about how my parents might react when they learned about recent developments. Part of me wanted to call them immediately and share the news, to see if external validation from Forbes and a major client contract would finally convince them that my business was legitimate. But another part of me hesitated, unsure whether their response would be genuine celebration or an attempt to minimize the achievement in some way. "I'll tell them soon," I said. "But right now I'm focused on making sure we deliver on the promises we made to Green Tech." Success isn't just landing the contract, it's executing flawlessly and building a foundation for future growth. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how dramatically my circumstances had changed in less than a week. The Forbes interview was scheduled for Tuesday. The Green Tech contract would be finalized within days, and Jessica was actively seeking my advice about her own career direction. The trajectory that had seemed uncertain and financially precarious was suddenly pointing toward possibilities I'd barely allowed myself to imagine. The kids' table at Dad's birthday party felt like ancient history, a moment of family dysfunction that no longer had the power to define how I saw myself or my achievements. External validation couldn't replace internal confidence, but it could provide perspective that helped you recognize your own progress and potential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight I felt ready for whatever came next. The business we'd built was gaining recognition, attracting clients, and creating the kind of impact we'd always envisioned. Success wasn't just about proving my family wrong, it was about proving that values-driven entrepreneurship could create both profit and positive change in the world. Tuesday morning arrived with crisp October air and the kind of clarity that comes after a week of life-changing events. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, and my notes spread across the surface in organized piles. In 30 minutes, Jennifer Walsh from Forbes would call to conduct the interview that had the potential to introduce our company to a national audience of business leaders, investors, and potential clients. The green tech contract had been finalized the day before, with signatures on documents that transformed our financial reality overnight. The initial payment had already been deposited into our business account, replacing the $347 that had haunted me for months with a number that represented genuine stability and growth potential. But more than the money, the contract represented validation that our business model worked, that sustainable packaging wasn't just an idealistic dream but a practical solution that created value for clients. I reviewed my talking points one final time, focusing on the key messages I wanted to convey about our company's mission, achievements, and vision for the future. Jennifer had made it clear that Forbes readers would be most interested in our business strategy and market positioning, but I also wanted to communicate the deeper purpose that motivated everything we did. Environmental responsibility wasn't just a marketing angle for us, it was the foundation of our entire approach to building a sustainable company. My phone rang at exactly 10 o'clock, and I answered with the kind of confidence that felt earned rather than manufactured. "This is Alex Martinez." "Alex, it's Jennifer Walsh from Forbes. Thank you for making time for this conversation. I'm excited to learn more about your company and how you've managed to build such impressive momentum in a challenging market." The interview lasted 45 minutes and covered every aspect of our business, from our founding story and early struggles to our current growth trajectory and future expansion plans. Jennifer asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated her understanding of both our industry and the broader trends driving demand for sustainable business practices. When she asked about our competitive advantages, I explained how our focus on environmental performance allowed us to solve problems that traditional packaging companies couldn't address without disrupting their existing operations. When she inquired about our target market, I described the growing number of companies that were facing pressure from consumers and regulators to demonstrate environmental responsibility through their business practices. But the question that felt most significant was her inquiry about the personal motivation behind starting the company. "What drove you to pursue sustainable packaging specifically?" Jennifer asked. "There are many ways to build a business, so why choose such a challenging market?" "I started this company because I believe businesses have an obligation to consider their environmental impact, not just their profit margins." I said, "The packaging industry generates enormous amounts of waste that could be dramatically reduced through better design and material choices. If we could prove that sustainable packaging was not only possible but profitable, we could influence other companies to make similar changes." "And you're succeeding in that mission," Jennifer said. "Your recent contract with Green Tech Solutions suggests that major companies are ready to invest in sustainable alternatives." Exactly, what we're seeing is that sustainability isn't just about corporate social responsibility anymore. It's about competitive advantage in a market where consumers and business clients increasingly demand environmental accountability. After the interview ended, I sat in my kitchen for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The conversation had felt natural and engaging, with Jennifer clearly interested in our story and impressed by what we'd accomplished. The article would be published in 3 weeks, giving us time to prepare for the visibility and potential inquiries it might generate. But beyond the business implications, the interview had been personally meaningful in ways I hadn't anticipated. Explaining our company's mission and achievements to a respected journalist had helped me articulate the significance of what we'd built, not just for ourselves but for the broader shift towards sustainable business practices that we were helping to lead. I called Sam to share how the interview had gone, then spent the rest of the morning working on our hiring plan for the additional staff we'd need to fulfill the Green Tech contract. The rapid growth we were experiencing brought new challenges around scaling our operations while maintaining the quality and values that had attracted clients in the first place. Around noon, my phone rang with a call from Jessica. We'd scheduled coffee for that afternoon to discuss her questions about her career direction, but her voice suggested something more immediate was on her mind. "Alex, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, but I just had an interesting conversation with Dad that I thought you should know about," she said.
What kind of conversation? I asked, curious about what might have prompted her to call during the workday. He asked me if I knew anything about a Forbes article featuring local entrepreneurs. Apparently Uncle Carlos heard something about it from someone at the country club and mentioned it to Dad this morning. I felt a familiar tightness in my stomach. The Forbes interview had been confidential until now, and I hadn't yet decided how or when to share the news with my parents. Having them learn about it secondhand, through gossip at the country club, wasn't how I'd wanted them to find out. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him he should probably call you directly if he wanted to know about your business activities. Jessica said. But Alex, you could hear the wheels turning in his head. I think he's starting to realize that maybe your company is more legitimate than he's been giving it credit for. The irony wasn't lost on me that external validation from Forbes magazine might carry more weight with my father than 3 years of building the business itself. His respect for traditional markers of success meant that media recognition from a prestigious publication would be harder for him to dismiss than the actual work we'd been doing. I should probably call him, I said. If he's going to find out anyway, I'd rather he hear it from me directly. That's probably wise, Jessica agreed. And Alex, whatever his reaction is, remember that Forbes magazine called you because of what you've accomplished, not because you needed your father's permission or approval. After we hung up, I spent several minutes considering how to approach the conversation with Dad. Part of me wanted to wait until the article was published, to let the recognition speak for itself without having to explain or justify it in advance. But Jessica was right that he should hear about it directly from me, rather than through the country club gossip network. I dialed his cell phone number, knowing he'd be between job sites or in meetings, but hoping to catch him during a brief break. He answered after several rings, his voice carrying the kind of distraction that suggested he was multitasking while talking. Alex, what's going on? Jessica mentioned you might call about some magazine article. Hi, Dad. Yes, I wanted to let you know that Forbes magazine is featuring our company in an upcoming article about young entrepreneurs. They interviewed me this morning about our business model and growth strategy. There was a pause longer than I'd expected before Dad responded. Forbes magazine. The business magazine. Yes, the same Forbes that covers major corporations and market trends. They're interested in our innovative approach to sustainable packaging and how we've gained traction despite being a small company competing against established players. Another pause, and I could almost hear him recalibrating his understanding of what my business represented. Forbes magazine didn't interview random startups or feature companies that weren't generating real results and market recognition. That's significant, Alex, Dad said. And for the first time in our conversations about my business, he sounded genuinely impressed rather than politely supportive. How did they find out about your company? They research emerging companies in growing markets, I said. Sustainable packaging is becoming increasingly important for businesses that want to meet environmental standards and consumer expectations. We've positioned ourselves as leaders in that space. And you said you've gained traction. What does that mean specifically? The question felt like an invitation to share details that I'd never been sure he wanted to hear. We just signed our largest contract yet, a 6-figure deal with Green Tech Solutions that will be our primary packaging supplier. The Forbes interview actually happened on the same day we finalized that agreement. The silence that followed was different from his earlier pauses. This felt like genuine processing, like he was adjusting his entire perspective on what I'd been building for the past 3 years. A 6-figure contract, Dad repeated. Alex, that's real business. That's the kind of success that, well, that changes everything. It feels that way, I said. But it's also validation of the approach we've been taking all along. We weren't just experimenting with sustainable packaging, we were building expertise in an area that companies increasingly need. I owe you an apology, Dad said, his voice carrying a tone I'd rarely heard from him. I've been treating your business like a phase you'd outgrow instead of recognizing that you were building something legitimate. Forbes magazine and major contracts don't happen by accident. The apology caught me off guard with its directness and apparent sincerity. I'd expected Dad to be impressed by the external validation, but I hadn't anticipated him acknowledging his previous skepticism so explicitly. I appreciate that, Dad, but I understand why it was hard to take seriously at first. We were unproven, and the market for sustainable packaging wasn't as developed as it is now. Maybe, but I should have given you more credit for seeing the opportunity before other people did. That's exactly the kind of forward thinking that builds successful businesses. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Dad asking detailed questions about our business model, client relationships, and growth plans. His questions demonstrated genuine interest and respect for what we'd accomplished, a dramatic shift from the polite dismissiveness that had characterized his previous inquiries about my work. When we hung up, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The validation I'd wanted for so long had finally arrived, but it had taken external recognition to convince him that my work was worthy of serious consideration. Part of me wished he could have seen the value in what I was building based on the work itself, rather than requiring Forbes magazine to validate it first. But another part of me understood that Dad's skepticism had come from love and concern, rather than malice. He'd built his success through traditional business methods and wanted to protect me from the risks and uncertainties of entrepreneurship. His inability to recognize the legitimacy of my approach hadn't been personal, it had been a limitation of his own experience and perspective. The afternoon coffee meeting with Jessica provided an opportunity to process the conversation with Dad, while also exploring her questions about her own career direction. We met at Grind Coffee, where Maria Santos greeted me with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been following our company's progress and was excited about our recent successes. "I heard through the business community grapevine that good things are happening for your company," Maria said as she prepared our drinks. "It's wonderful to see local entrepreneurs succeeding, especially when you're doing work that matters for the environment." Jessica and I found our usual table, and she immediately wanted to hear about Dad's reaction to the Forbes news. I recounted the conversation, emphasizing his apology and genuine interest in understanding our business model. "That's exactly what I was hoping would happen," Jessica said. "Dad respects traditional markers of success, and Forbes magazine definitely qualifies. But more importantly, maybe this will help him see that there are different paths to building something meaningful." "What does this mean for your own career questions?" I asked. "Are you still thinking about exploring alternatives to the family business?" Jessica sipped her coffee thoughtfully before responding. "Talking to Dad about your success made me realize something. I've been successful at Martinez Construction because I've been good at working within established systems and relationships. But I've never tested whether I could build something from scratch the way you have." "What would you want to build?" I asked. "That's what I've been thinking about since our conversation at the party. I have skills in marketing, client relationship management, and business development that could apply to different industries. But I've also been wondering whether there might be opportunities to bridge traditional construction practices with sustainable approaches." The direction of her thinking intrigued me. "You mean like incorporating environmental considerations into construction projects?" "Exactly. The construction industry is facing increasing pressure to adopt sustainable practices, just like packaging companies were a few years ago. Clients are asking about green building certifications, renewable materials, and reduced environmental impact during construction." I could see where her logic was leading, and it aligned with conversations Sam and I had been having about potential market expansion. "There might be opportunities to combine your expertise in the construction industry with knowledge about sustainable business practices." "That's what I'm wondering," Jessica said. "Maybe I don't have to choose between the family business and something completely different. Maybe I could find ways to push Martinez Construction toward more sustainable practices while also developing expertise that could be valuable in other contexts." The conversation felt like a breakthrough, both for Jessica's career exploration and for my understanding of how our different paths might complement rather than compete with each other. She had established relationships and industry knowledge that could be valuable for implementing sustainable practices, while I had expertise in environmental solutions that traditional construction companies needed but didn't know how to develop internally. "What if we collaborated on something?" I suggested. "Not necessarily a formal business partnership, but maybe we could explore ways to bring sustainable packaging and construction practices together for clients who want comprehensive environmental solutions." Jessica's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "That could be really interesting. Companies are looking for partners who can help them meet sustainability goals across multiple aspects of their operations." We spent the next hour brainstorming potential collaboration opportunities and discussing how Jessica might begin developing expertise in sustainable construction practices. The conversation felt like the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, one where we were peers working on complementary challenges rather than siblings with incompatible career paths. That evening I worked late at the co-working space, finalizing production schedules for the green tech contract and researching potential staff additions we'd need to meet increased demand. Sam had left earlier to have dinner with his parents, who wanted to celebrate our recent successes with a family meal that would actually be supportive rather than skeptical. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from Mom. I answered with some trepidation, unsure whether she'd heard about the Forbes interview from Dad or through her own channels. "Alex, your father told me about the magazine article and the big contract you signed," she said, her voice carrying warmth that had been absent from our recent conversations about my business. "I wanted to call and tell you how proud I am of what you've accomplished." The simple directness of her statement was more meaningful than elaborate praise would have been. Mom had always been supportive in general terms, but she'd also shared Dad's concerns about the financial risks and uncertain prospects of entrepreneurship. "Thank you, Mom. It feels good to have some external validation after 3 years of building the business." "It's more than external validation," she said. "It's proof that you saw an opportunity that other people missed and had the courage to pursue it even when it was difficult. That takes real vision and determination." We talked for 20 minutes about the Forbes interview, the green tech contract, and my plans for growing the company. Mom asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine interest in understanding what we'd built and how we plan to expand our impact. Near the end of our conversation, she said something that felt particularly significant. "Alex, I realize that your father and I haven't always been as supportive as we should have been. We were worried about you taking risks that might not work out, but we didn't give you enough credit for your judgment and capabilities." "I understand why you were concerned," I said. "Starting a business is risky, and you wanted me to have security and stability. Yes, but we should have trusted that you were smart enough to manage those risks and dedicated enough to make your business succeed. The results speak for themselves." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet co-working space, processing the emotional weight of receiving the family support I'd wanted for so long. The validation felt meaningful, but it also highlighted how much energy I'd been spending on seeking approval rather than simply focusing on building something valuable. The Forbes interview would be published in 2 weeks, introducing our company to a national audience and potentially generating new business opportunities. The green tech contract would provide financial stability and serve as a case study for attracting similar clients. Jessica was exploring ways to incorporate sustainability into her own career path, possibly creating opportunities for future collaboration. But beyond those external developments, something fundamental had shifted in how I thought about success and family relationships. I'd spent 3 years trying to prove that my business was legitimate, that my choices were sound, that my approach was worthy of respect. The external validation had finally arrived, but it had also taught me that the most important approval had to come from within. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Family dinner was amazing. Mom made your favorite dumplings to celebrate our success, and Dad wants to know if you'd like to join us for dinner this weekend. They're excited to hear about the Forbes interview and ask questions about our expansion plans." I smiled and typed back quickly. "I'd love to join you. It will be nice to celebrate with people who've been supporting us all along." The contrast between Sam's family dynamic and my own had become a source of perspective rather than envy. The Chens had been consistently supportive because they trusted Sam's judgment and wanted to understand what he was building. My family's skepticism had come from concern and unfamiliarity rather than lack of love, but it had taken dramatic external validation to overcome their resistance. The important thing was that both forms of family support were meaningful, even if they arrived through different pathways and at different times. What mattered most was building something valuable and sustainable, creating work that aligned with my values while generating the financial success that allowed continued growth and impact. I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave the co-working space, taking a moment to appreciate how different my circumstances felt compared to just 2 weeks earlier. The kids' table at Dad's birthday party seemed like a distant memory, a moment of family dysfunction that no longer had the power to define my self-perception or confidence level. Success hadn't arrived in the form I'd originally imagined. It wasn't about impressing people at expensive parties or earning approval from family members who measured achievement by traditional metrics. It was about building something meaningful, solving real problems, and creating value that extended beyond immediate profit margins while also achieving the financial results that made continued growth possible. The drive home took me through downtown Riverside, past the construction sites where Martina's construction crews were working on projects that would shape the city's development for decades to come. I thought about Jessica's interest in sustainable construction practices and the possibility that our different expertise areas might complement each other in ways that created new opportunities for both of us. The Forbes article would introduce our company to readers across the country, potentially opening doors to clients and partnerships we couldn't currently imagine. But the most significant outcome of recent weeks had been the shift in family relationships and the recognition that external validation, while meaningful, couldn't replace the internal confidence that came from knowing you were building something aligned with your values and capabilities. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door that evening. The modest space that had sometimes felt like evidence of my struggles now felt like a choice, a reflection of priorities that valued substance over appearance and impact over status symbols. The product samples lining the walls represented not just inventory but proof of concept, examples of sustainable solutions that were gaining recognition and market acceptance. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to our current clients, informing them about the upcoming Forbes article and our expanded production capabilities thanks to the green tech contract. The message would serve multiple purposes: maintaining relationships with existing clients, positioning us for potential expansion of current contracts, and demonstrating that our recent success was just the beginning of our growth trajectory. But as I wrote, I found myself thinking beyond immediate business implications to the broader significance of what we'd accomplished. 3 years earlier, sustainable packaging had been a niche concept that most companies dismissed as too expensive or impractical. Now it was becoming a competitive necessity as consumers and business clients increasingly demanded environmental accountability from the companies they supported. Our success wasn't just personal or financial, it was proof that businesses built around environmental responsibility could thrive while creating positive change. The Forbes article would share that story with readers who might be inspired to pursue similar approaches in their own industries or to seek out partnerships with companies that prioritize sustainability alongside profitability. The phone rang as I was finishing the email, and I answered to find Jennifer Walsh on the line again. "Alex, I wanted to give you a heads up about the article timeline. We've moved up the publication date because of editorial interest in your story. The piece will run next week instead of in 2 weeks." The accelerated timeline felt both exciting and nerve-wracking. "Is there anything specific about our story that prompted the change?" "Your combination of environmental mission and business success fits perfectly with current market trends that our readers are following closely." Jennifer said, "Sustainable business practices aren't just nice to have anymore, they're becoming competitive necessities. Your company represents that transition happening in real time." After we hung up, I called Sam to share the news about the accelerated publication timeline. His excitement matched my own, but he also raised practical considerations about preparing for potential increases in inquiries and business opportunities once the article appeared. "We should probably set up systems for handling media inquiries and new client contacts," Sam said. "The Forbes article could generate more interest than we're currently equipped to manage." The observation was practical and important. Success created new challenges around managing growth, maintaining quality standards, and ensuring that rapid expansion didn't compromise the values and relationships that had enabled our initial achievements. But those were good problems to have, the kind of challenges that came from building something valuable that people wanted to support and be part of. The Forbes article would introduce our story to a national audience, but the real work of fulfilling that promise would happen in the months and years ahead as we continued to grow our company while staying true to the environmental mission that had motivated everything from the beginning. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how dramatically my circumstances had changed since the evening at Dad's birthday party. The external validation had arrived in forms I'd never anticipated, but more importantly, I gained clarity about what success actually meant and confidence in my ability to create it on terms that aligned with my values. The kids' table had been a moment of family dismissal, but it had also been a catalyst for recognizing that I didn't need other people's approval to build something meaningful. The Forbes interview and green tech contract were significant achievements, but they were also stepping stones toward larger goals around transforming how businesses think about their environmental impact. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I felt ready for whatever came next. The recognition would continue to grow, the business would expand, and the people who mattered would see the value in what we'd created. But most importantly, I knew exactly who I was and what I was building, and that knowledge was worth more than all the external validation in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.